Caledonia, or an account, historical and topographic, of North Britain from the most ancient to the present times, with a dictionary of places, in 4 volumes, Volume 1, by George Chalmers, London, 1807. The Preface. I presume to lay before the public a work which has been the agreeable amusement of many evenings. The earliest ages of the Scottish annals have been considered by able writers as a wild region of pure fable, and have been fastidiously resigned by great historians to the vain credulity of industrious antiquaries. Yet was I not discouraged from persevering in the purpose which I had long entertained, of rectifying the ancient history of North Britain, whatever might be its fabulousness, or obscurity, or its difficulties arising from disputes. I thought I saw a clue to guide me through this gloomy maze, and I was not in the habit of being very apprehensive of certain contentious humours which are never to be pleased. I soon formed my plan and began to collect my documents, knowing that in the details of history, as well as in the distribution of justice, he who proposes what is not admitted as incontrovertible ought to give the best evidence, which the nature of the subject allows. I immediately perceived that the ancient chronicles, which the critical Innes first submitted to the public, did not plunge the curious reader into the abyss of fabulous antiquity. It was during that vehement competition for the Scottish crown that the two nations, the one contending for superiority and the one for independence, carried up their several pretensions to the utmost verge of antiquary times. Those great examples were followed by the two earliest of the Scottish chroniclers, Fordun and Winton, who brought the aborigines of Scotland from Egypt by direct transmission during the remotest ages. Boas and Buchanan, who might have derived a better spirit from the recent revival of learning, went beyond those useful chroniclers in the grossness of their fables and the absurdities of their theories. It was wittily remarked by the late Lord Hales that, although we have been long reformed from popery, we are not yet reformed from the fictions of Hector Boas. Lord Bacon complained, in his Advancement of Learning, of the partiality and obliquity of the history of Scotland in the latest and largest author, Buchanan, that I have seen. Yet did the late learned author of the ancient peerages declare the sceptical doubts of Buchanan as entitled to more consideration than the laborious researches of shallow antiquaries. Till the scholars of Scotland shall be reformed from such speculative heresies, it will be scarcely possible to rectify the errors of fabulists, or to repress the dogmas of our polemics. Of those veracious chronicles, as they have been published in the critical essay of Innes, I have made some good use of the fablers who succeeded them. I have hardly made any by pursuing a very different track, and using quite dissimilar proofs. I have been able to ascertain the aborigines of Caledonia by evidence, which comes near to demonstration. Without appealing to doubtful authorities, I have traced the Roman transactions in North Britain, and have illustrated the obscure histories of the Picts and Scots from such satisfactory documents as convey moral certainties. The earliest disputes touching the Scottish history began with the petulant attack of George Buchanan on Humphrey Lloyd for presuming to suppose the Britons to be more ancient than the Scots. But 1,000 facts which are now stated collaterally attest that Buchanan was wrong, while the Welsh antiquary was right. The affliction of a century brought very different polemics upon the stage. Sir George Mackenzie, a scholar of various tradition, was so heroic as to come before the public in defence of the length of the royal line of the Scottish kings against Bishop Lloyd. This heroism of the lordly advocate called out the able controversist, Bishop Stillingfleet. There are documents now introduced for a very different purpose, which prove with full conviction that Sir George attempted impossibilities, while Stillingfleet only showed how much he overrated his own knowledge. The King's Advocate was thus drawn into a dispute with the Irish antiquaries, touching the original country of the Scots. The genuine history of this Gaelic people, which, from satisfactory information, is at length submitted to the reader, demonstrates that the antiquaries were historically right, while the Lord Advocate was completely fabulous. This success led the Irish writers to claim the family of the Stuarts as by descent their own. They were encountered by Richard Hay, a professed antiquary who pointed out their errors without being able to ascertain the truth. The genuine origin of the Stuart family will be found to be fully discovered after the researches of learned men had altogether failed. The true descent of the Douglas family had been equally sought for by intelligent zeal, but without success, whatever diligence and learning were employed in the search. Their origin will be seen in the following work, as it was discovered in charters. Thus will it appear, from the pursuit of the following account of North Britain, that there has been scarcely a controversy in our annals which is not therein settled, a difficulty that is not obviated, a knot which is not untied, or an obscurity that is not illustrated from documents as new as they are decisive, though they are introduced for different purposes. Such is the elaboration of this work, it may perhaps supply hope with the expectation that the wild controversies of the elder times may be now consigned to later repose.
The history of Scotland, says the late historical royal, may properly be divided into 4 periods. The first reaches from the origins of the monarchy to the reign of Kenneth II. The second from Kenneth's conquest of the Picts to the death of Alexander III. The third extends to the death of James V. The last from thence to the ascension of James VI to the crown of England. The first period, from 0 to 843 AD, is a region of pure fable and conjecture, and ought to be totally neglected or abandoned to the industry and credulity of antiquaries. Truth begins to dawn in the second period, from 843 to 1286, with a light, feeble at first, but gradually increasing, and then events which then happened may be slightly touched, but merit no particular or laborious inquiry. In the third period, from 1286 to 1542, the history of Scotland, chiefly by means of record preserved in England, becomes more authentic. Not only are events related, but their causes and effects are explained. And here every Scotsman should begin not to read only, but to study the history of his country. During the fourth period, from 1542 to 1603, the affairs of Scotland were so mingled with those of other countries that its history becomes an object to foreigners. The following history is confined to the last of these periods. Thus far, the historical royal, who thus tells in specious terms what part of the annals of his country ought to be written and what ought to be read.
Yet, the late Lord Hailes, when he wrote his Annals of Scotland from the Ascension of Malcolm III, pushed his inquiries far into the obscure regions of the second period, which is indicated by the royal historiographer. Nay, he even went back to the Ascension of Duncan in 1034 AD, declaring, however, that the history of Scotland previous to that period is involved in obscurity and fable. The critics of his country cried out with hilarity, thus has his lordship happily freed from the fable the whole reign of Malcolm Canmore. In this manner, then, we are left 1,000 years of obscurity and fable to my credulity and industry as an antiquary, fairly charged with credulity, who reduces his historical topics to moral certainty, or fitly accuses of fabulousness who ascertains his facts by a comparison of charters with circumstances. Id est certum quod certum redi potest. Everything is certain which may be made certain. Buchanan did not know who built the Roman wall between the Forth and the Clyde, but Camden, by throwing his antiquarian eyes on the lapidarious records which had been dug from his foundation, ascertained that curious fact. Nor is there anything more certain in any period of Scottish history than the Roman transactions in North Britain, as they have now been investigated and at length ascertained. In them there are much less debate and uncertainty than in the history of Mary Stuart and her son. The Society of Edinburgh, for the encouragement of arts, sciences and manufactures, offered in 1756 a gold medal for the best history of the Roman and afterwards of the Saxon conquests and settlements to the north of the Sevres Wall. But the scholars of Scotland remained sluggish and silent. and I now submit to the reader's judgment a history of both those interesting events. The same society offered a gold medal for the best account of the rise and progress of commerce, arts, manufactures in North Britain. But the scholars of Scotland remained inert and incommunicative of what they did not know. And I presume to submit such an account of the origin of commerce, arts, and manufactures to the curious eye of inquisitive men. I come, however, too late to claim the gold medals, and I fear the last of that society expired with the recent deaths of Sir William Pulteney and the Earl of Roslin. But I may shelter myself under the authority of the most learned, the most intelligent, and the most accomplished men in Scotland, who offered those prizes, from the charge of folly, in treating of trifles, and from the sneer of self-sufficiency for scribblings of events which merit no particular inquiry. I was ambitious, I will avow, to offer my countrymen the ancient history of Scotland, elaborated into detail and illustrated into light, without regarding previous opinions or fearing contentious opposition, without dreading difficulties or apprehending disappointment. I have divided my work, without regarding fantastical conceits of fabulous epochs, into such periods as were analogous to the genuine history of each successive people. The Roman period extended from Agricola's arrival in North Britain, AD 80, to the abdication of the Roman authority in AD 446, forms the first book from its priority in time as well as precedence and importance. In discussing this interesting subject, I was not content with the previous authorities. I engaged intelligent persons to survey Roman roads, to inspect Roman stations, and to ascertain doubtful points of Roman transactions. I have thus been able to correct the mistakes of former writers on those curious topics. Much perhaps cannot be added to what has been now ascertained with respect to the engaging subject of the first book. Yes, since Caledonia was sent to the press, a discovery of some importance has been made. A very slight doubt remained whether the Burghead of Moray had been a Roman station, as no Roman remains had been found. But this doubt has been completely solved by the recent excavation within the limits of a Roman bath. The first chapter of the following work will be found to be as much the first chapters of the Annals of England and of Ireland as it is of Scotland. The Pictish period naturally succeeds the former book, as it extends from the abdication of the Romans in AD 446 to the overthrow of the Picts in AD 843. It will be found to comprehend interesting events, the affairs of the Picts, the fate of the Romanised Britons, the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons on the Tweed, the adventures of the Scandinavians in the Orkney and Western Isles, the colonisation of Argyll by the Scots from Ireland. It is the business of the Pictish period to trace the singular history of all those people, various as they were in their lineages, throughout the different events of their obscure warfare and the successive turns of their frequent changes. Add to those topics of peculiar interest the introduction of Christianity, which in every age and in every country has produced such memorable effects. The Scottish period, forming the third book and extending from AD 843 to 1097, will be found to comprehend historic topics of equal importance. The union of the Picts and Scots into one kingdom, the amalgamation of the ancient Britons of Strathclyde with both, the colonisation of Galloway by the Irish, the annexation of Lothian to the Scottish kingdom, the history both civil and ecclesiastical of all those people of various races, with notices of their antiquities, their languages, their learning, their laws. All these form historical matters of singular interest to rational curiosity, if they be investigated from facts in contempt of fabulosity. The fourth book contains the Scoto-Saxon period, which extends from AD 1097 to 1306, and which details many notices of varied importance. At the first and at the second of those epochs, momentous revolutions took place, though they have passed unnoticed by Scottish historians, and were unknown to the historiographer royal. With this period began a new dynasty of kings who introduced new people, new manners, new usages, and new establishments. In this period, the Saxon colonisation of proper Scotland was begun. In this period, Scotican Church reformed. In it was introduced the municipal law of North Britain, in the place of Celtic customs. In this period originated her agriculture, her commerce, and shipping, and fishery, her manufactures, and her coins. The beginning of this period formed the pivot on which turned the Celtic government of ancient ages and Anglo-Norman polity of subsequent times. Yet is it of a period so crowded with changes and so varied with novelties that the late historiographer Royal says the events which then happened may be slightly touched but merit no particular inquiry. But I have dwelt on those revolutions and have marked every age by a vast detail from the Charteries in respect to the civil history, from 1097 to 1306 to the classical annals to law, to manners and to domestic economy. I have tried to ascertain every interesting circumstance and to render the national annals of that interesting period quite familiar to the reader. And, to give completeness to the whole, are added supplemental views of subsequent times, which have their details to instruct and their curiosity to amuse. Such is the plan which I have formed and essayed to execute for reforming and ascertaining the ancient history of North Britain, which has been so long distorted by controversy, obscured by fable, and disregarded by fastidiousness. It is the common complaint of intelligent readers that there is nothing new in history, as the same facts again are served up in different forms with some interceptions of sentiment. It is very seldom indeed that any history contains so many new facts, new discoveries, and new documents as the following account of North Britain discloses. What can be more novel than ascertaining the aborigines of their country by proofs which are as curious in themselves as they are decisive in their inferences? Roman camps in North Britain had been already brought before the curious eye, but it is quite new to show their location amidst the prior forts of the Britons for some hostile purpose. Roman roads and Roman stations had been before mentioned by tourists and traced by antiquaries, but it is altogether new to investigate their policy and to form the whole of the Roman transactions in Caledonia into a connected body of genuine history during 4 interesting centuries. The Picts had been sometimes casually mentioned, but it is quite a novelty to give the history of the Pictish people, their lineage, their language, their antiquities. It was known from Bede that the Picts had defeated and slain the Northumbrian Aegfrid in the Battle of Nectar's Mere, but it is altogether new to ascertain the true site of the consequential conflict. The genuine chronology of the Scottish kings, their civil wars, their hostilities with the Picts, the Scottish laws and literature are all novelties. The colonisation of Scotland by the Anglo-Saxons, Anglo-Normans and Flemings, comprehending the origins of the Stuarts and the descent of the Douglases, is quite new. The history of law during the 12th and 13th centuries, including the origin and epoch of Regium Majestatem, the history and manners in this period. The account of agriculture, of manufactures, of trade, and of the various topics which are connected with them are entirely new. The whole volume may be regarded as a novelty, considering its arrangement, its matter, and its documents. Few histories can be found wherein there are so many charters called for, so many records avouched, so many facts ascertained, and so many documents quoted. Yet this volume, which comprehends the history of so many people during ages of darkness, does not comprehend my whole plan for rectifying the annals and ascertaining the antiquities of Caledonia. I propose to offer to the public 3 other volumes, successively and soon if my health and spirit should continue. As the present volume has given the history of several people, the next volume will form a dictionary of places, chorographical and philological, for the investigation of the various languages which have been ever spoken within that country. This volume will be immediately sent to the press. The 2 subsequent volumes will contain the local history of every shire in Scotland, upon a new plan, and from the most authentic informations. The materials for all these are already collected, and they are mostly all worked up, so that there is little to prevent me from sending the whole to the printers, except that I should certainly feel this circumstance too fatiguing, and the public might perhaps regard it as too repulsive. We must always remember with Milton that God has set labour and rest as day and night to men, successive. I will conclude with a passage from honest Verstegan's Restitution of Decayed Intelligence, 1605. Albeit it may seem unto some a rash and unadvised attempt that after so many the great and worthy labours of our learned antiquaries, a new work under the name of Caledonia should now be presented unto public view. Yet when it shall be pleased the courteous reader to have considered of the contents of the chapters, I trust he will see that the ensuing matter will be answerable to the foregoing title, much of it being so extraordinary and unwonted that perhaps not any, especially of our own nation, has thereof written before. I know I have herein made myself subject unto a world of judges, and I am likest to receive most controlment of such, as there are least able to sentence me. Well I wot that the works of no writers have appeared to the world in a more curious age than this, and that, therefore, the more circumspection and wariness are required in the publishing of anything that must endure so many sharp sights and censures, the consideration whereof, as it hath made me the most heedy not to displease any, so has it given me less hope of pleasing all. After so long a preface, I will beg leave to add only 4 words. Facilius carpere quam imitari.